Hi, this is Doma. Welcome back to my channel of Books and Soul. The book I want to talk to you about this week is called Cień Ojca, or The Shadow of the Father in English, written by Jan Dobraczyński. Jan Dobraczyński is an author that I just recently discovered, even though he wrote so many things. He was born in Warsaw in 1910. He was a writer and a journalist. Usually his books deal with philosophical or religious themes, often based on biblical stories. Sometimes he also deals with historical/political themes as well. But the first book I read by him is The Shadow of the Father, and it's one of his most important works. A short synopsis. This book follows Saint Joseph. So we meet Saint Joseph just as he's about to leave Bethlehem, where he lives, as he is the oldest son from the family that stems back to David, King David. Due to certain circumstances, he moves to Nazareth, where he meets Miriam. Miriam, this fascinating, particular young girl whom he falls in love with. He wants to marry her, and they actually plan to get married, everything's all set, and then something happens that basically flips his life upside down. And those of you who are familiar, obviously, with the story of St. Joseph and Mary and the Nativity, can predict what's going to happen. What's really cool about Dobraczyński is that he really makes his reader enter the world of Jewish traditions, Jewish culture. He makes you live through the main holidays in Jewish tradition. He also shows you the distances between the different cities where the action takes place. Really makes you kind of see the landscape, the people, the priests, the hierarchy, the simpler people that live in those cities. Really tries to show you the dynamics of the Roman occupation and the time period in general. I have to say that this is really important for someone who really wants to understand also the roots and the foundation from which then Christianity springs, and basically the setting where Jesus grew up and where Saint Joseph and Mary lived. The style of Dobraczyński is beautiful. If you have the chance to read it in the original, I really recommend it. It's so beautiful. He's very descriptive. He's also very psychological. You can tell that he chooses his vocabulary and his words with great attention. What's really interesting in this book, and what really strikes in this book, is how the author is really able to deal with this subject and talk about this subject, looking at the human aspect of all of its characters. So the reader is introduced to Saint Joseph as this very, pious and hardworking man, a good man, but we also see his humanity, many of his flaws or worries or maybe doubts and moments of disbelief. We also see Mary and Jesus as totally human. Mary, who there's an episode, a really beautiful episode, when Jesus gets lost in the temple, or he basically chooses to remain in the temple, and Mary is just completely devastated. She's looking for her son. She doesn't know where he is, and having almost like her crisis of why is this happening? We lost Jesus, and how could this have happened? This ability of the author to really focus on the human and show that this story, which is the beginnings of Christianity, is really rooted in human history, and it's made by humans, and humans who basically trusted and believed and were obedient to what was being asked of them. But on the other hand, it's not like Dobraczyński forgets the divine aspect of the story. There are beautiful descriptions of Mary. So Mary is never described as particularly beautiful or striking, let's say, in her appearance. But Saint Joseph keeps on saying that there's something mysterious about this girl. There seems to be another world inside of her. Her eyes have a certain spark to them and a certain peace and kindness. So the author clearly points to Mary's state of grace and at her relationship with God, that's for sure. But it's very interesting and subtle in the way he does it. Another way in which he does this is also when he talks about Jesus. There are moments and little snippets where Saint Joseph has the intuition that there is something more to this boy. For example, there's a beautiful scene in the book where he witnesses Jesus pray, and he's extremely moved by it, by this conversation, by this prayer. Of course, there's the fact that Jesus is very smart. He's able to memorize scripture and explain it in a way that's just incredible, because no boy his age is able to do that. And all of the teachers in the synagogues keep telling Joseph to maybe send Jesus, think about sending Jesus to learn from the doctors and from the priests in Jerusalem. Another theme that is present in this book throughout the whole story is showing how God is present in the lives of these three people, but in general how he is present. And the way Dobraczyński shows this is through various ways. So the most obvious and blunt ways in which God is making himself present is, for example, the moment of the Annunciation of Mary, where there's a clear messenger who is sent to ask Mary if she is willing to become the mother of God. Then there are dreams. So those are moments when, usually this happens to Joseph when he's sleeping and there is a message he is receiving about what to do next. So these are also clear instances where God intervenes and says, do this, do that, and follow these steps. Another way in which God gives a sign as to what to do next is, and this is kind of a paradox, is through obstacles. So there are moments when Saint Joseph thinks there's just no way out, and the plans that he's had for his family, for how they should live their life, maybe are being completely turned upside down. But it's actually in these moments that God is making it clear in what direction he wants them to go, and where he wants them to be, where he wants them to stay. He is using the negative circumstances that this little family is facing to show and indicate what he wants from them and what his will is. The third theme in this book, I think, that is really important is that of love and sacrifice and obedience. Love, because when you look at Saint Joseph and Mary, it's a really beautiful love story. The way Dobraczyński describes how they've met and how they have fallen in love is really beautiful. For me, it was striking to see how much Saint Joseph was really in love with Mary and she with him. So even though their lives later on asked for numerous sacrifices, this love was at the core of all their actions and all the things they did for each other and their kindness and their family. So it was at the basis of everything. It's very interesting to look at their story as a love story. It didn't happen just because it had to, but because they did fall in love, they did love one another, and then they decided to get married and accepted everything that came their way. Sacrifice, because in their whole story, there are moments when sacrifice is being asked of them. Saint Joseph, when he learns that Mary is pregnant, he doesn't understand why, and he is faced with this almost unbelievable fact, and he has to decide whether he wants to be with Mary or not. He has to sacrifice this image of a life he planned with her that will no longer be that way. Sacrifice on the part of Joseph again, because he would be just the shadow of a father, never a real father. A man would have to be ready to face many obstacles, many difficult situations in order to protect his family. Sacrifice on the part of Mary, because of the yes that she said. Would have moments where she would be misunderstood, mocked, maybe a bit alone. And then obedience, of course, because in accepting such a huge task from God, all of them would have to be ready to follow what he wants and to be obedient in many instances, even without understanding completely. So I think this book can be very useful and also very refreshing in the way it looks at the way God acts and is present in our lives. I think sometimes we forget that he can make himself present in what is human and the reality around us, and we think he's somewhere out there. And I think the story of Saint Joseph, Mary, and then Jesus can really show us that he makes himself present and gives us signs as to what he would like us to do and what he has in store for us. Maybe not necessarily through big apparitions or dreams where he gives us messages, but definitely through the circumstances that are in our lives, positive and negative, as we can learn from this book, from the people we meet, the things that happen around us. I think if we look at them with the eyes of Saint Joseph or Mary, for example, it can be a really big lesson for us, and I think it can change our perspective on so many things, and I think we can then notice him in so many little things that happen in our lives. So that's it for today. I do hope you enjoyed this video. I recommend you read this book. I hope to see you guys soon. Bye!